Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the plenary session 4 on inclusive governance and leaving no one behind to accelerate the SDGs implementation. I'm very pleased to introduce you the moderator for this section, who is in the person of Ambassador DESA Joe. Ambassador Joe is the Secretary General of the Korea NGO Council for Overseas Development Cooperation. Prior to his current position, Ambassador Joe served as the career diplomat. He was the ambassador of the Republic of Korea to Canada and also served as a deputy minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please join me to welcome Ambassador Joe with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, how are you? I believe this is not a good time. It's 4 o'clock and it's, the timing is not so favorable to us because it must be very sleepy for all of you who traveled from long distance. My name is DESA Joe. I'm representing the Korean NGO Council. I represent 140 organizations like World Vision, UNICEF, and the Good Neighbors, all those organizations. And also we represent 4 million members who are making a donation. And so that's the organization I work for, KCOC. And the topic we have today is inclusive governance to accelerate the achievement of the goal, our global goal of SDG. And I believe it's important for 2 reasons. I thought about that. One is we have discussion from time to time on the issue of governance or inclusive governance, but mainly we are focusing on, so far the issue of this topic was focused on not a women or youth or persons with disabilities, this group. And mainly we were focusing on the actors, like government, business, private sector business, or civil society, the actors of implementing this SDG. So I think this focusing on this specific issue is not common. So I believe the conference, the session, for this plenary session is very important in that respect. The other reason I think this topic for our session is important is the reason because we are facing our environment is not so favorable nowadays that I can feel wherever I go. We have a goal that we have to achieve this SDG and coping with climate change. And these global goals we are sharing, but the climate is not so favorable. You see the rise of this nationalism, rise of this unilateralism, populism, and shrinking the democracy and shrinking civic space. Civic spaces, I think shrinking civic space is quite alarming nowadays. So in that respect, I think this inclusive governance, especially on these vulnerable groups, are significant in that, especially in that when we consider those climate. So with that, I would like to invite first 2 speakers, and in between, they will make a 10 minutes presentation each, and in between I would like to invite 1 or 2 questions or comments from the floor. So that will be about 30 minutes, and then we will move on to the plenary. We will invite 7 panels to present 5 minutes presentation, and we will spend about 1 hour. So now I would like to invite 2 speakers, Mr. Aslam Alam, Chairman and Executive Director, Bangladesh Institute for Information Sustainable Development. Mr. Aslam, please. And also I would like to invite another speaker, Mr. Anwar Sanusi, Secretary General, Ministry of Village, Disadvantaged Areas Development and from Indonesia. Now may I invite Mr. Aslam first for his presentation.
Distinguished moderator, Ambassador Joe, distinguished presenters, distinguished panelists, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. It's indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be able to make a presentation before this august audience, although as moderator has indicated, time is not in favor of us. Still, we will try to impress you. You see, we must give proper attention to this issue because this is one of the biggest challenge of achieving SDG, inclusive governance and leaving no one behind. You see, one in a 6 person live in South Asia, and so is the poor and vulnerable people. Most poor and the most vulnerable people live in South Asia, including Bangladesh and India. And I have been dealing with vulnerable people over decades as policymaker, as academic, as well as practitioners. So many of you probably haven't seen face of a person living under $1.92 a day. So I will show some faces as well, so that you can comprehend the situation. Now, you see, I will begin with UN Secretary General's quote, listening to the views and guidance of people living in poverty and acting together with them. So this is very, very important, that listening to the people living in poverty and acting together with them. If we don't act together with them, we won't get desired result. So today's focus, vulnerable groups includes other people, but today's focus is on women, youth, and persons with disabilities. And I'll give you some statistics about Bangladesh. Where it is, many of you may not be familiar. Bangladesh is the 8th largest country in the world in terms of population, 168 million people. And 30% of the population is very young, 10 to 24 years. Economic size is 33rd in the world, and GDP growth rate is 6.5 over the last decade and 7.5 over the last 3 years. And currently it is 8%. And cell phone subscription, 145 million, internet subscription, 30 million. But literacy rate, please note, is 73%. And poverty rate is 14.8%, World Bank estimate, 24 million people in poverty. That means living below $1.92 a day. And 2 million youth enters job market every year. And the economy has to generate enough job for them. Average marriage age for girls is 15.8 years. And 65% of girls are married off before they reach 18 years of age. So this is the background statistics. Now, how to promote inclusive governance? I'll be very short. I won't be able to elaborate many things. I have put in my email address, so anyone requiring explanation or comments, you can just contact me over email, and I'll be happy to respond. And if possible, I will give answer to this session, and also I'm available whole day tomorrow, so we can have discussion. Promotive inclusive governance. This requires regulatory measures. You see, merely talking in seminar, workshops is not enough, or awareness raising is not enough. So regulatory measures are needed, like laws, policies, guidelines, templates need to be made. And this is particularly important for bureaucrats, because bureaucrats are guided by rules. So if there is nothing in the rules, they won't follow it. So it has to be in the rules, laws, policies, guidelines and templates. And in Bangladesh, in many cases, we have done that. Capacity building of public institutions. This is also very important. Physical, public institutions, many public institutions require physical resources, financial resources and human resources. And also changing mindset. Above all, it requires changing mindsets. If we do not change our mindset, it is very difficult to make governance inclusive. And mindset won't change automatically. So we require regulatory measures, capacity building, and ongoing pushing or persuasion. Then institutionalizing participation and engagement of vulnerable groups. So how do we institutionalize? So from my experience in the Bangladesh bureaucracy for over the last 36 years, and we have been dealing with it. So my understanding is that every organization has a charter of duties, and every individual official has a charter of duties. So this has to be embedded into charter of duties, this concept of inclusive governance. And then there is annual performance report. In many countries, including Bangladesh, we have organizational performance report every year, done annually. And we have individual performance report. So this has to be included in the annual performance report for both organization and individual working within the organization. That will help institutionalizing participation and engagement of vulnerable groups and recognizing best performers. Bangladesh is currently recognizing its best performers. So that's a good example. Identifying, preserving, and disseminating good practices, and media and information literacy. Service providers and service recipients both needs media and information literacy. We provide many services, many provisions, digital Internet of Things, but service recipients are not aware of them or unable to utilize them. And vulnerable groups particularly are not capable of utilizing information. So this information literacy is also vitally important for institutionalizing participation and engagement of vulnerable groups. And some innovative approaches and initiatives. So I have put forward here 3 examples. Empowerment. The case of the Employment Generation Program for the Poorest, implemented by Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief in Bangladesh. This program addresses poverty reduction, disaster emergency response, climate change adaptation, social protection, etc. So you see, this is a picture of ongoing work. This kind of work is created, but you see here very few females. Very few females work. But this program requires that 1/3 of the beneficiaries or workers should be female. But there's not many females. So we talk to the ground level people, we listen to them, and we were able to get more females in the workforce, 1/3 of the females. How? Because we empowered women. So it is done by local bodies. Local bodies have got women members, but they were not given the responsibility. So we empowered them that they will be in charge of selecting beneficiaries, particularly women beneficiaries. So that increased female participation in the workforce. Also, we engaged female supervisors. Female supervisors were able to get more female workers. So this is the case of empowerment of both women and empowerment of local government bodies. And this is another project. This project is about constructing cyclone-resilient houses in the Bangladesh coastal belt, which occasionally is hit by cyclones, severe cyclones. So you can see the houses. These houses were built with government funding. You can see that there is no wall. There is no wall because it was thought that wall will be added by the recipient. But who are the recipient? They are the ultra poor. They do not have the capacity to build the walls. So they could not build the wall. We didn't consult the beneficiaries beforehand. So that's why basically it didn't achieve the objectives. Although 30,000 houses were built and they could not live in it. So my time is up. There is another appropriate technology case. And I think for way forward appropriate education, affordable healthcare, empowerment of women, media and information literacy, capacity building, awareness raising and advocacy, and so and so. So I am available for answering your queries later. So I end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I invite Mr. Anwar, can I may I offer the floor for one more questions if there's any? Otherwise, we can have two presentations and we can have a Q&A session. But in between, is there anyone who would like to make questions or comments on the first presentation? I think we'd rather have two consecutive presentations and then maybe you would like to open the floor for the Q&A. May I invite now Mr. Aslam, Mr. Anwar Sanusi for your presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, distinguished Ambassador Joe, and then also all speakers, presenters, ladies and gentlemen. Within 10 minutes, I would like to maybe give very highlight information about the participatory policy making and engagement of the vulnerable groups for leaving no one behind. I would like to start that I already mentioned on my speech this morning that Indonesia has a population. I think maybe in Bangladesh 168 million. We are as Indonesia is 262 million people living in Indonesia. So, but the problem is 60% of them living at the villages or in rural regions. One of the biggest of the problem of the village is almost dealing with the issue about poverty, and then also unemployment, and then also urban migration. This is a big issue that that maybe already it's happened in many countries, especially in Indonesia. But since year 2014, we have like such a big bang policy. We call it as a village law. Through this village law, a government giving like a big opportunity for the village, for village to manage by themselves, and then the state governments has a duty to provide such a special funding that we call it by the village funds, because through the village funds, that's maybe the villages has the opportunity to transform from the previous condition to the expected condition of self-reliant villages. So the building village, actually this is the idea of the village law. This, as I mentioned, that the problem of the village is about the poverty. So the aim is, there are three aims that we would like to achieve. One is for fulfilling a basic needs, and the development of the village infrastructure, development of economic potential, and then also utilization of resource and sustainability of the living. So there are four objectives that would like to be achieved. In order to achieve this one, so we need like to increase of human quality life, enhancing welfare of the village community, and then also poverty reduction. There is a way how to manage of the village funding. That's maybe I can say this is one of a democratic system that we have. So for each villages, actually the structure of the village governments is a combination between the self-government and then self-governing community. So it looked like the similar. If on the central government they have the executive branch, in the villages they have also the executive branch. They have also the legislative branch. In the villages is also they have legislative branch. The member of the legislative is the representative of the people in the villages. So it should maybe represent all the group, represent all representatives, such as the women, and then also maybe based on religions groups, and then also from the youth, and then also from disabled. So we introduced like the concept of the inclusive governance since from the villages. We already see after maybe the 5 years of implementation of the village law, the number of like the participation on the villages is getting improved, is getting increased. So this is like this one. We call it as there is a democratization improvement on the village participation. So of the maybe it's more than we have in Indonesia now. We have 74,954 villages in entire nation, from Aceh to the Papua. So the villages, in order maybe to produce such the policy, they have to conduct such a meeting, village meeting. So through this meeting, they identify what actually the program that are really needed to improve the quality of life, to improve of economic activity. So this is the policy of Indonesian government about the village fund policy. This is actually very dramatic policy. So some people mention it's a big bang policy, because in the previous we never government provide such a big fund to all villages in Indonesia. So this is the number of like the funding that they receive for every year. For each villages receive about maybe 60 to 80,000 US dollar. So this policy still be continued for at least for the next 5 years. This is like the output of the village funding. So the villages, there has opportunity to transform the condition from the village, and then they make it such by building infrastructure. This infrastructure is really needed to support for the economic activity. It is also, the village funding can be used for such, we call it as the empowering people activities. So we call it by through like providing, for instance, is early childhood education, and then also integrated health services that are really involved the most of the people, especially for the women. And then this is one issue that I would like also use. This is one of the example. What the participation of the people, especially on the village economic activity. We introduce such, we call it as like the village on enterprise, as economic institutional that are maybe used for all the people on the village to manage of the economic affairs. Nowadays we have about 45,000 village on enterprise. So almost 60% of the villages in Indonesia, they have the village on enterprise. This is just one of example in distribution. We try to how much the benefit, how much the offset of the village on enterprise, and that's it's quite promising because some of the village on enterprise they have they can create a lot of maybe money, and then also is a rise up of economic activity on the villages. One example is on Bali. This is near the Pandawa beach. There is one of the best practices, the village on enterprise that can create more about maybe 200 entrepreneurs. That mostly in the previous is unemployment people know is to be the entrepreneur. This is and then also we can also mention some of maybe the result through the village funding that's also can improving in many aspects. I just want to mention one important is benefit to the household status. There are two, maybe to increase social status of household which was previously considered poor. I want to say that in terms of poverty in the villages can be minimized. And then also household gain more respect and more included in village development. This is also one maybe outcome of the village funding, and through the involvement of the women, we can also reduce the number of stunting in the Indonesia from 37.2% to 30.8%. So there is a 7% of decreasing. And then also provide unemployment, provide employment rates in the villages. And then also per capita income on the rural areas also increase dramatically. This is also maybe a Gini ratio in the village also can be minimized, and then also poverty alleviation can be reduced by 1 single digit from this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we can have about 10 minutes Q&A session from now on. And previous session 3, I had a chance to attend briefly, and I noticed that the audience are not so eager to ask questions. So that's what I found. So I would like to start to give you some time to think about your questions. First, I will make a question from my side. I think the issue that we are discussing today is the participation in the process of decision-making process. That's what we call participatory decision-making. And we had in Korea, about 20 years ago, we had the government whose slogan was participatory government. And so in Korea, this movement began almost 20 years ago, and it takes time. We found that this participation process in attending participation in decision making, it takes a lot of time. That's what we found. And today we are focusing on specific groups, this women, youth, and persons with disability. But before inviting them, I think the universal group of civil society overall, that's general, group of a group of people should participate before we have each subgroup, before we focusing on each subgroup. So I would like to ask you, both presenters, that what are the biggest challenges in each of your setting in your country that you are facing in realizing the participation of civil society and also this specific group of vulnerable groups?
Okay, I go first. Thank you very much for a very insightful question. Actually, participatory decision making has been started, say, in our country for quite some time. And government agencies are required to hold public hearings before adoption of any major policy, etc. But the problem is getting the vulnerable groups in the participation process is very, very difficult because they are not even aware of the systems, procedures, or they simply do not have the courage to turn up or to speak. That's a big problem, and they require, hand-holding, and many a time they are ignored. And people, those who participates in the participatory decision-making process, actually they don't represent the vulnerable groups. So that's a big problem, and getting them is the biggest challenge. So now policymakers or decision makers have to take extra initiative to go to the vulnerable groups and listen to them. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Based on our own experience, especially after maybe the village law, as I mentioned, that the village law is providing a big opportunity for the villages. And then most of the villages are from the poor people, at least maybe under the poverty lines, and then also vulnerable people. So one thing that we do is, first of all, maybe we like recruit, as we call it, as village facilitators. The village facilitators play a very important role, especially in giving advice to the village, and then also they communicate for the village about their rights, especially in how to use the village funding. And then also the second thing that we also from the government's perspective, especially from the state government, we like try to invite a lot of maybe NGO to be to giving us advice, and then also giving us maybe the idea and how to create, as we call it, as inclusive villages. Inclusive villages is, of course, the one of the biggest problem is some vulnerable is suicide. It's very, very, very easy to communicate with on the meeting. They are attending, but just suicide. So that's why the NGO is very active to advocate them about their rights, especially in utilization of the village funding.
Thank you very much. I believe you may have enough time to think about your questions or comments now. Can I open the floor? Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Usually participatory governance projects, as you said, it's very difficult. It takes time to succeed. But then you realize that it's the benefits of it is short-lived. When the project starts, you see enthusiasm, you see the participation, but then within 5 years, maximum 5 years, you see the enthusiasm dying. So what are some of the measures you are putting in place to sustain this participation and not just a 9-day wonder project kind of?
Okay, I go first. You see, this is very true. When a project-based intervention is implemented, in those cases this happens. So as long as the project is there, participatory decision-making project. So as long as the project is there, interest is there. Project is over, interest is over. And this is even more, true for projects which are externally funded. This happens. But if projects are, co-funded, then there is more, ownership. And this has to be mainstreamed within regular projects, not an extra project for participatory decision making. So if it is mainstreamed within regular projects, then this won't happen, because these are continuing projects. Say, I have mentioned the project. This is an ongoing project for going on for more than a decade. So it's continuing. But if it's a one-off, say, 1 year long project, its project is over, everything is over. So it has to be mainstream. And other thing is, vulnerable people must have access to information, but they do not have access to information. Particularly, there are regulatory constraints, and then also mindset of public officials. They don't want to share information. And thirdly, vulnerable groups are not aware of their rights, So here also massive awareness raising required by the NGOs or civil society, etc., so that people are aware of their rights and they can demand participation and participate when there is an opportunity. Thank you.
We have 3 more minutes to have a discussion, so can I ask 1 or 2 more questions?
Hi, this question is for Bapak Anwar. Indonesia are currently leading in digital economy, especially in the e-commerce and e-hailing sectors. So I think I'm quite interested when you actually share with us on your case study about 45,000 villages are on enterprise. And if you can share some of the government role to get this enterprise participate in digital economy opportunities.
Yeah, thank you very much. You're right. That's Indonesia is quite active, especially to introduce about e-commerce. Yeah. So the role of government mostly is just like to be a catalyst of this process. So we know, like in encourage, especially the like e-commerce, mostly as running by the young people, the millennial age here. So, so the role of the government is just maybe providing a lot of information, what the potential that are really is maybe important, and also there is a big potential in economically. Like nowadays, we have like 45 village on enterprise. In Indonesia, we call it BUMDes. The BUMDes, the kind of business activities is so diverse. Some is also is based on like agriculture, and then some also based on maybe tourism, and then some based on mostly like economic creativity. So like the role of government is we just provide what information, the kind of information. Because like through the village funding, through the government provide of the village the funding, it's quite big funding. So each of villages try to looking for what the big potential that they have, and then the role of e-commerce is try to connect it this from the supply to the demand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have 1 more question, and then we'll move on to the next session. Please.
Hello, thank you very much. I enjoy your presentation a lot. My question is for Mr. Aslan. You mentioned that one of the responsible way of involving the vulnerable group in the process of development is for the rural participation. The country where I'm from, China, it also have a big rural area. I was wondering if there is any specific policy or like any policy changes you've made in your country during the past decades that was successful in terms of the rural participation?
Yes, we did. Actually, learning from experiences, we immediately revised our policies and guidelines, particularly the project I've shown. Actually, they did consult a large number of people, but they were not the vulnerable people. Representatives from different government agencies, field officers, academicians, engineers were consulted, but the beneficiaries were not consulted, who are the vulnerable group. So realizing that government revised the guidelines, how to do it, but that cannot be said of whole of the government. That every ministry, every project is being implementing this way or designing this way, or co-creation is going on. It's not the case. So it has to be mainstream. It has to be mainstreamed, and again, it will require continuous, persuasion, emphasis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And time is up, but I see one more questions from that side. So I'd like to have one more question before I move on to the next session.
Thank you for the presentations. I would like to address my question to Bapak Anwar. My question would be that how can government do the monitoring of village fund, considering the huge amount of villages in Indonesia and also the different condition of infrastructures? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the good question. For 5 years, within the 5 years of the implementation of the village funding policy, government already transferred about 257 trillion rupiah, or maybe it's about 250 million US dollar. It's such a big funding, and that's a big amounts of money. So also many people is very curious, and then also would like to know how about the monitorings. Yes, actually we have two kind of monitoring. First, we call it as vertical approach, because the funding is allocated from the national budget. So national audit board, they have the duty to monitor about the utilization of the village funding. And then also we have the funding is transferred to the district budget. So the district auditors also has a duty to monitor of the village funding utilization, but still not enough. So we introduce like the kind of maybe a horizontal monitoring, through by the involving like the people, especially as like all of the people. So we really instruct for all the villages to provide the open information to in utilization of the villages by put all information on the open for the access through the information that can easily to be accessed by all the people.
Thank you very much. Would you like to join me in giving them, the two speakers, a big round of applause? Thank you very much. Now may I invite also six the panelists on the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this all participation of the panelists. We have 6 panelists, And we have about 5 minutes presentation each. Please. And I noticed that our attention span for this group is about 10 minutes, so I'll try to make 2 presentations, and then we will have the Q&A session, brief Q&A session, and then we will move on to the next speakers. And at the final stage, we may have more Q&A session, but in between, I would like to also, after 2 speakers, we would like to invite open the floor for this session. So first, I would like to invite our panelist, Mr. Darantui, Specialist, Ministry of Labor and Social Protection from Mongolia. You may present either here or here, it's up to you. Yeah, whatever, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to all organizers and distinguished guests. Today, I'm going to share about how the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection of Mongolia in promoting take part in inclusive governance by engaging people with disability, youth, and women. I'm really sorry. Because of technical problem, the total population of Mongolia is 3.2 million. The 65% of Mongolians are working group age, and 4% are elderly people. Also, 91% of persons with disabilities are covered by social protection system. In decision-making process, our ministry is paying close attention to this involvement of people with disabilities, youth, and women and journalists and citizens. First, I would like to talk about the persons with disabilities. The government established the General Authority for Development Persons with Disabilities in 2017 within the frame of implementing the law on the rights of persons with disabilities. Also, Prime Minister's Office, the National Council was established with the official duties to coordinate intersectoral interventions for the rights of persons with disabilities at the national level and to provide consolidated guidance for their implementation. Its branches are working in all provinces. You can see from the slide, capital cities and districts, and its sub-councils are working all ministries. So I will move the next, talking about the youth. The 15 to 34 age group is the largest demographic group in the country. It's representing over 32% of the population. The law on the promotion of youth development was adopted by the Parliament in 2018. After the law on promotion of youth development got in force, at the national level, a total of 32 youth development centers have been actively engaged in activities towards adolescents and youth. In addition to operating youth councils, interest clubs, and support groups. Also, the youth can comment any policy, program, planning, and the local budget allocation to integrate their voice and to influence their rights and interests. Locally, as of 2018, these youth development centers, their affiliated youth councils, interest clubs, and support groups have reached and provided service to approximately 450,000 of young people, which makes 42% of total youth. Lastly, I like to talk about the women. So, women in Mongolia have played vital roles in family and economic life. Our ministry promotes women's employment, social insurance, and social welfare service through the social protection system. The four-nation system in Mongolia, women is, like you can see from the slide, the Prime Minister shall head the National Committee on Gender and supervise the operation of the committee. Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, it's our ministry, the Vice Chair with the committee. The National Committee on Gender shall have branches at the local administration, ministries, and also NG members. So, I would like to conclude. What was the major lessons learned from implementing these initiatives for better fostering inclusive governance at all levels of government and across different stakeholders in the society? Yeah, starting from strengths first, the legal environment has been created, such as ratifying the UN conventions, adoption of law on rights of people with disabilities, law on gender equality, law on youth development. The secondly, there is government implementing agency operating in the specific disability, women and youth issue. So thirdly, we have quite a good social protection system. Yes. Fourth, we have also quite good sufficient information about statistical data, people with disability and youth, except women. Fifth, our international cooperation has expanded. Also, we can see the opportunities. For instance, even there is a weak collaboration with NGOs, the government at the moment, but we are willing to work with them and has already made its first step to breaking their ice. So also we have a weakness, which is the operation of sub-councils nationwide. It's not yet established. Also, we still have established the focal points under every ministry and every province, also capital city and all districts too. So we should find the effective way to make the sub-council work properly. For example, lack of coordination among state organizations, lack of enforcement of legislation, weak cooperation between NGOs and governmental and non-governmental organizations. Okay, I will finish in my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Whenever I make a presentation, I found that sometimes it's very difficult to see this warning sign of 5 minutes time. So, but usually I miss. That's a blind spot. From when I focus on making a presentation, usually I couldn't recognize that someone was raising the sign. So that was. Thank you so much for your presentation, and also sorry for this pressing, giving you up such a pressure. And now I would like to invite Ms. Sewang Dema, the Senior Planning Officer, the Gross National Happiness Commission from Bhutan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank UNPOC for giving me this opportunity to present on the initiatives that my country has done so far for engaging the vulnerable groups. So, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So when it comes to the inclusion of vulnerable or disadvantaged groups, In Bhutan, we have the constitution, the LG Act, and the 5-year plans that actually guarantees or ensures a holistic approach to a sustainable development. So these arrangements ensures the participation of all citizens, including the vulnerable ones, in the planning and decision-making processes. We also have the local development plan manual for the LG level and the policy screening tool that supports inclusive governance. When it comes to engaging the youth, among many others, these are some of the few that we have initiated. We have policies such as the National Youth Policy that provides broad framework for youth engagement. We also have Children's Parliament to educate and include our youths on the governance system in the country. In collaboration with CSOs and NGOs, we also organize informal and formal forums such as the annual Youth Summit that you can see in the picture in the slides to discuss youth-related issues or policy options regarding children and current issues, basically for consideration by the Parliament and the Royal Government. We have also initiated a leadership program called the Foundational Leadership Program and the Young Professional Leadership Program that basically aims at improving the leadership capacity of our youth. So these courses are specifically designed for entry-level young professionals from various sectors such as the private sector, corporate sector, and the civil servant. So for women, we have the gender equality policy that's being drafted right now. We have also initiated gender responsive budgeting, and we also have a gender mainstreaming guideline to help agencies identify and work with indicators for improved gender streaming in planning and decision making. We have also initiated creches and daycare centers in offices to help women employees increase their productivity at work and to also contribute meaningfully to decision making. In collaboration with some of the CSOs and NGOs in Bhutan, we have also started a parliamentary caucus for the women. So this is basically to empower our women to participate meaningfully in parliamentary elections. For the persons with disabilities, we have a disability policy that was drafted in close consultation with the persons with disabilities themselves and their representatives as well. We also have the vulnerability baseline assessment report that this report actually assesses the vulnerability of each group and it identifies opportunities to actually improve their condition. So this report is, different agencies in the government refer this report to better understand the needs and priorities of the vulnerable people to include them in the planning, budgeting and decision-making processes. And if you look at this picture, we have recently initiated sign languages during the news program so that the people with disabilities have access to information and that they are abreast with what's happening in their country. In the current plan, we just started our 12 5-year plan. So in the 5-year plan, in 12 5-year plan, one of our main focus is to focus on building disabled-friendly infrastructures in the country. So at least ensuring that the public institutions are accessible to the persons with disabilities. So just to share some lessons learned while initiating these initiatives that I just presented, we learned that one of the most important that we learned is the shared decision making. How having a very vulnerable centered approach for fostering change and creating sustainable societies. So when you have like an inclusive decision making, it brings in more diversity of thinking and experiences, and you have more well-rounded ideas and better decisions. While implementing translating these strategies into actions for including these vulnerable groups, what we found was that the agencies responsible for translating these strategies into plans didn't have the required expertise, including financial resources. We did not have adequate financial resources to provide them with relevant services and support. Need for reliable data. I think this was presented by many presenters before me. So we also had the issue with data. Our data management system is very weak, resulting in low quality data and less cost-effective use of limited resources. Then we also found out that it was difficult to change people's attitude and mindset, especially at the LG level, where people still consider women as the weaker sex, and still thinks that young people should not actually speak when the elders are around, so they have to listen to the elders, so they are not supposed to actually come up and say something. Then, lastly but not the least, partnerships. We found that that's very important to place a strong emphasis on the triple C's: coordination, collaboration, and consolidation, in order to bring all actors together. Yeah, in order to bring all actors together, and not only to engage the vulnerable groups, but also to help us achieve our 2030 agenda, Sustainable Development Agenda. So that's it, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have two presentations from the panelists. May I open for the floor for one or two questions before we move on to the next panelist? Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentations. In the Philippines, we have a Philippine Commission on Women, and they intend to become a bigger organization. Will this be more beneficial for us to attend to the gender issues that we are faced with in a developing country? Thank you. I'm addressing it to any one of the ladies, but for the experience of Bhutan and Mongolia, of course.
Yes, in Bhutan also we have a commission that looks after the women's. It's a commission for the women and the children. So even we consider it important to have to institutionalize an engagement mechanism in terms of either having a new agency to look after the specific vulnerable groups, or empower the existing one to act as a focal point for these vulnerable groups. So in Bhutan, for women we have NCWC, we have other agencies such as BNU, and even for the youth we have a youth development office. So yeah, we have those.
Thank you.
So,
you have anything to add?
So when I mentioned the women in Mongolia played a vital role in the family and economic life, but in my ministry, we are just promotes the women's employment and social insurance and the social welfare through the social protection system. But National Committee on Gender is under the Prime Minister, so they are working on the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. We can have more questions on these two panelist speakers and after this session. And so I would like to invite now two speakers. One from Ms. Lee Jung-hyun, Assistant Director, Deputy Director from Incheon Metropolitan Government.
Good evening, I'm Jung-hyun Lee, an Assistant Deputy Director of Citizenry Community Division with Jeolgu Incheon Metropolitan City. I'd like to share with you the story of the village designed by co-creating with the people. And why people? Why should we act together with them? People want to live in a village with a safety and good environment and education. And the civil expectation is high like that, but the administrative capacity is lower. So we can do this. We can solve this problem by a village-friendly solution through citizen participation and public-private cooperation. The progress of community work goes like this. People come together and they make village plans, and they hold general meetings, and they make a decision. This will expand the right agenda into the village agenda and will lead changes of inhabitant-led from government-led, and it will grow democratic citizens. We have 95 village communities throughout the city. I will give you some examples. The first one is self-cultivated community garden. As you can see, that land used as a private garden, and the residents complain about the bad smells and garbages. So we opened public people workshop for improvement and practice use of public land, and they offered various opinions. So now it became a popular place with a lot of cultivating programs. The second one is rendezvous with the empty house and the youth. We have many empty houses in our city. As the people fled to the new city, our city is getting older and less energetic. So we just made an empty house to the youth house or sharing houses, like linking various activities of the youth. So we offered empty house bank as a remodeling training, or urban regeneration workshops, or 3D printed training, and sometimes it was used for mushroom farming or galleries for the youth artists. And the third case is making safe alley. As we are old city, we have many narrow and blind alley, and sometimes it was very uncomfortable or dangerous for elderly people. So we drove frescoes and installed lights and lamps. So people participated in this activity for their own safety. So the final one is transition town. We have a Homi village in our town, and Homi village is old and just a small city with 100 families. And then there was a social conflict. And a parking lot was built in the middle of the town, and a plan to develop a factory site was announced. And the town went thrown back into chaos. And then we were selected as a public service design project by central government. So residents have a big discussion to turn the threat into an opportunity. So we made our energy independence village. It's a village that reduces energy consumption and increases self-reliance by developing local energies. We decided to install solar power plants at the parking lot and improve the living environment by utilizing sun and rain power. Climate change and energy issues requires government policy, but I think first of all it has to be done in the village, the smallest unit of living. I hope to work together and join forces in everyone's city today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. May I now invite Mr. Carlo Vedetti, Manager for Planning and Policy Advocacy, Pacific Disability Forum. Yeah, please, you can use this one.
Thank you. A very good afternoon. Across the room, I see many of us wearing either reading glasses or prescribed glasses. But if I ask you if you're a person with disability, I'm sure you will not identify. Remove your glasses, you won't be able to read better. So I represent a Pacific Disability Forum. It's a regional disabled persons organization. We are based in Fiji, representing 20 Pacific Island countries and territories, and almost 1 million persons with disabilities that the organization represents. So on the screen you would see Leave No One Behind equals disability inclusive SDGs. So today, this afternoon, sharing briefly with you two of the initiatives in terms of the participation of persons with disabilities for inclusive governance. One of those, so I'll talk about accessibility, and I'll talk about inclusive budgeting. So around accessibility, accessibility is one of the preconditions to our inclusion. So if you talk about inclusion of persons with disabilities, whether it's in your programs or policies or projects, you must keep in mind that it has to be accessible. If I was a person, a woman on a wheelchair, I won't be able to be up on the stage because I don't see any accessible ramp around here or to get myself on top. If I was a person who is deaf, I won't be able to participate because there's no sign language interpreters. If I was a blind person, then communication must come to me in accessible formats. So accessibility is a precondition. Accessibility in all its form, accessible environment, the built environment, the road, the public building, the banks, the market, the jetties and the wharves. Accessibility to transportation, whether it's land, transport, air, or water, and accessibility to ICT, information, communication, and technology. And so it's a blueprint for the region in the absence of comprehensive standards at the national level. And so we build capacities of our members to participate in this process. The other one is around inclusive budgeting. Unless government allocates budget for the inclusion, full inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities, leave no one behind is just another slogan. And so building and supporting the capacity of members to read and understand budget, do basic analysis, and prioritize what to ask for. So it's more and better, and more does not necessarily mean it's better. So it's analysis of government's budget, and we find that most of our Pacific government spends less than 0.5% of the GDP on the inclusion of persons with disabilities. Some key lessons that we have learned in this process on these two initiatives. One, the institutionalization of disability across ministries. In the region, in the Pacific, you would notice that there is a focal ministry. It's usually under health, under education, or social affairs, or community affairs. That is the focal ministry. However, it needs to be institutionalized across. So infrastructure must make sure that in whatever public building that is going up, that is made accessible. That in employment, there is inclusion of employment or the livelihoods of persons with disabilities. So it has to be institutionalized across government ministries. Secondly, government must review and adopt disability inclusive legislation, policies and programs, collect relevant disaggregated data. Currently, we have in census and major surveys the questions on my type of disability, but they are not asking the barriers to my inclusion. Asking the barriers to my inclusion will tell you what kind of intervention has to follow. And then assign sufficient budget to implement your policies and programs. So that's budget, and the last point to raise is that government donors and other development partners must adopt a non-discrimination and accessibility requirement in all its developments, including procurement processes, to ensure that whatever development is going to happen, it's inclusive and it's accessible to persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you have highlighted one of the key precondition, the accessibility and this institutionalization and budget. I would like to open, before we just have heard two speakers, and I would like to open the floor one or two questions before we move on to the next session. Yes, please. I see those two. Okay. We'll take 3 questions. Can we have 3 questions together and answer at the same time, please?
Sorry. Yes, I'd like to share on the disability topic that one way to overcome such problem, and I've worked with Global Campus Foundation, is to look at the policy narratives that have come out on this issue. And what we've been pushing forward actually is the concept of differently abled. So rather than using the word disabled, which sort of is in connotation with inability, the idea is differently abled. So I wanted to share that because the idea of being differently abled means that at any time, we all could experience being differently abled. It might not be a permanent condition, but it could be a temporary condition. And also it's the idea of celebrating diversity in humanity. And differently abled is something very natural that can happen to anyone at any time. So I just wanted to throw that in because with that concept then it's not about inclusion. Differently abled is for everyone. And I just want to put in this panel here too that we do need to consider the mental disorders as well, which is not physically, physically visible on the differently abled part. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and we will have 2 more questions. Good.
My query is for Ms. Lee from Incheon Metropolitan Government. Republic of Korea stands high on the SDG index, number 18 probably. I don't know who are the most vulnerable groups within Incheon government. Might be elderly people and persons with disability. If this is so, then have you been able to address the accessibility issue for physically challenged people everywhere within metropolitan government? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to the 2 presenters, I think the last one from the Pacific, but if the one from this metropolitan can also answer. Are you also, in terms of empowerment, some disabled people, especially those that are wheelchair, want to be the ways that we could transform their thinking, and they want to be also actively be empowered to be like the other normal persons. That be also part of the principles of policy thinking.
Thank you. Would you like to start from?
Thank you for the question. If I understand it correctly, how persons with physical disabilities are included? We are a regional organization, and we have National Disabled Persons Organization, and most of them would represent cross disabilities, meaning they would represent those who have physical disabilities, those who are deaf, those who have visual impairment, blind, low vision, etc. Those with psychosocial disabilities, with mental disabilities and intellectual disabilities, deaf-blindness and deaf-blindness. In terms of the work that we do with those who have physical disabilities, let me speak with some of the experience that we have in Fiji. Those who, especially that comes out of special school, which is an institution, would be enrolled through a vocational training program, and this is where they could further their primary education into vocational program. Even though it's an effort, but more can still be done for persons with physical disabilities, because some of them are literally not in school because of the stigma associated with their disability, because they are looked at differently, and because the stigma that exists in the communities, in the villages, in the families. Because if I sent my child with disability, then everybody would know that the family has somebody like that, and they look at us differently. So barriers, stigma, improving institutions, programs to enable not only persons with physical disabilities, but everybody. So it's addressing the accessibility curriculum, textbooks, communication. It's more than just the accessible building, even if it's for persons with physical disabilities. Thank you.
Well, I'll answer your question, Mr. You have asked that if we can just make a participate of the vulnerable groups in our civil activities, but as a in fact, my department is only belongs to the citizenry community participation. So maybe any participation with disabled people belongs to other departments. So I can give you the exact answers. But we are thinking about it. We are thinking about it in the whole Intercity to give some beneficiary to the vulnerable groups. So like if we are making this kind of public community activities, they can do that. They can do the direct helps to the vulnerable groups. Like you know, in our interior and the safety ministry, they are just making what's that? Because the community public services is like in our public government, we have nurse and public servant just make a team and visit the vulnerable groups home and just do care everything, health or welfare system, such as things. So it's still hard to make them participate into the kind of activity, but we just can help them indirectly.
Thank you very much. Any panelists want to add anything? Then I would like to move on to the next session. Next, so far I think we were quite successful in managing our time, so we are on the right track. And I think it's so far the reason why we are so successful in management of time is we have excellent moderator. Because you were so serious, I just want to make a joke. Everybody was so serious. I think maybe it's tired or serious. I'm not sure. So we have two more speakers, and I would like to invite Ms. Soyeon Park first, the youth group from the youth group. She's the millennial generation, representing I think at least from this session. She is the winner of the 3rd Youth Forum, Ms. Soyeon Park.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be here amongst you and speak on behalf of millions of youth residing in Korea. And at the same time, I hope I can fully represent and reflect the desires of youth. My name is Soyeon Park, and today I'd like to make a presentation about creating a butterfly effect with 3E, a proposal for youth inclusion in SDG discussion. Six years ago, I participated in a student organization where youth suggest new policies to government, hoping that I could contribute to making the world better. At first, I thought my efforts were like the small wings of a butterfly that could lead to a hurricane of a better future. However, it didn't take me a long time to realize that the words and actions of the youth do not have enough power to change reality. While part of the student organization, I found out several problems. First, most youth are not interested in social issues and SDG-related programs. Also, there are not available long-term programs that youth can participate in. And moreover, the ineffectiveness of existing or prior programs has taught youth that their actions are futile. As a solution that can ensure youth inclusion, I'd like to suggest Youth Committee with 3E, a student-led organization supported by government. Low level of interest and participation, the lack of long-term programs, and the futility learned through prior ineffective programs should be respectively addressed through education, engagement, and evaluation projects, which are 3E. The first E is education. Youth should get continuous and practical education through SDG Academy. Current SDG education programs, such as summer camps, are short-term, and most online resources about SDGs are only available in English. Therefore, the development and dissemination of SDG educational materials which are written in Korean and which can reflect Korean status are needed. Also, SDG classes which can be offered by government or international organizations should be available both online and offline to ensure their accessibility. The second E is engagement. Under this, I'd like to suggest 3 programs: Youth Assembly, Youth-led activities, and promotions. First, the voices of youth should be reflected through Youth Assembly on SDG. Youth can identify the problems of their local communities and suggest policies based on their knowledge learned through SDG Academy. In order to ensure the professionalism and the practicality of the youth's research and proposals, the government should provide opportunities where the youth can seek consultation from specialists belonging to NGOs, NPOs, or CSOs. Second, more youth-led activities should be provided. Current SDG-related programs deal with limited number of issues, and these are being conducted to serve the organizers, usually the government's desires, not the needs of the participants, which are youth. Therefore, youth-led activities such as campaigns or volunteer programs should address all 17 SDGs in a balanced manner and ensure that young can take the lead at every step from planning to implementation. To this end, the cooperation of and the collaboration with government, related organizations, and private sectors are needed. Finally, the Youth Committee can attract more number of youth into SDG discussion by promoting their activities through social media, flash mobs, or youth press. More youth are likely to be interested in the Youth Committee by having their friends as promoters, rather than government or other organizations being promoters. The third E is evaluation. Youth can evaluate SDG reflection in their local communities by making an annual report card and giving their community a letter grade. This report card will be forwarded to the government and related organizations as a reference of next year's SDG policies, as well as helping the youth decide the directions of their future activities. For 3E to be successfully implemented, we must consider several things. First, sufficient support should be provided at the government level. In order to bridge the gap between youth's creativity and reality, the involvement of related organizations is needed, which can be accomplished with an administrative and financial support from the government. Second, the government should limit themselves to the role of providing active support so that youth can suggest policies that they really need and want, rather than the ones that are likely to be accepted by government organizations. And finally, incentives for related stakeholders are needed. Because people's opinions are very slow to change, incentives can function as a catalyst that can induce the voluntary participation of otherwise disinterested stakeholders before changing their mindset. I believe that we can achieve a better and more sustainable future by blowing a little wind on the youth's embers. Always remember that small wings of a butterfly can lead to a hurricane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now may I invite Mr. Gomer Pado, Executive Director, Social Enterprise Network from Philippines.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jo. I think it's very strategic that you help me last, because I'm the only male in the panel, no? Also because we're talking about women, I should bow down to the powerful women on stage with me. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank DESA, DPIDG, and UNPOC, and also to the Ministry of Interior and Security of the Republic of Korea and Incheon Metropolitan City for your kind invitation for us to add our social enterprise voice into inclusive governance and the SDGs as we push for cross-sectoral collaboration in accelerating an achievement of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. So that we're all on the same page, I'd like to present a formula on what social enterprise is based on my organization's definitions. Social enterprises are actually businesses. They are businesses with social missions. They have social purposes. If you look at the circles, they're actually equal. the business is equal to the social purpose. They also come on the same level. It's at one over the other. So based on this formula, we can infer three permutations. The first one is around innovative not-for-profit ventures, benefiting a community, the marginalized sectors, or the public at large. The second permutation would be around a social purpose business venture. And the third one is a hybrid organization mixing not-for-profit and for-profit or earned income elements. Yeah? Another handle that I would like to provide this afternoon would be around characteristics of social enterprises. The first one would be around social purpose. Of course, this is what we call triple bottom lines. These are explicit social aims, usually around job creation, training, or provision. Wow, that's 3 minutes already. They have ethical values or triple bottom lines, sometimes multiple bottom lines. For example, for our partners in the Bangsamoro region in southern Philippines, peace is their bottom line. Then we have people, profit, planet, plus peace, so that's 4 Ps. And then accountability would be towards a wider community for social, environmental, and economic impact. But I would focus on the third pillar, on social ownership, and this would be around inclusive governance of social enterprises. This would be with governance or ownership structures based on participation by stakeholder groups. And also profits are not going towards those who usually owners of capital, but it's actually written down into benefit for society. I'd like to, yes, in my organization, in the Philippine Social Enterprise Network, we actually implore 4 development strategies as our take around stakeholder engagement. Empowerment strategies, of course, in terms of ownership, social enterprises owned and managed by vulnerable groups. But I would also want to focus around social inclusion strategy, which is basically addressing disadvantaged or excluded groups or sections of society to regain their dignified place in society. Usually women, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities. And this is actually our moving forward towards what do we mean by inclusive governance, and how does cross-sectoral collaboration help social enterprises scale for us to be viable pathways towards implementation of the agenda. The first one would be around policy. Policy has been mentioned a lot of times since yesterday. But I would like to stress around co-creation of public policy. This would be from the stakeholder groups themselves and what their aspirations are in terms of how they see government and the public sector support them. There are a lot of examples on this, not only in the Philippines, but also with our partners in Korea, our partners actually in Thailand, who just passed their social enterprise policy in January. We're still pushing for our own social enterprise policy in the Philippines, but we're glad that social entrepreneurship has been included in the newly approved Bangsamoro Organic Law earlier this year. Second one is around markets. If you look at markets, how does government and the public sector actually become viable markets towards including products from social enterprises managed and owned by social enterprises. Most especially owned and managed by vulnerable groups. We have a case study in the Philippines where the National Federation of Cooperatives on Persons with Disabilities are actually doing school chairs for the Department of Agriculture, our Ministry of Education. Basically, school chairs and other educational toys and materials used. Another one is around human capital. Thank you. We would want government and like private sector to include women, youth, persons with disabilities when they design programs, most especially including them in their supply chains. And maybe as a wrap-up, I would like to refer to a report which we published last year together with ESCAP and the European Union in the Philippines and the British Council and my organization. It's called Reaching the Farthest First, the State of Social Enterprise in the Philippines. It actually maps out the social enterprise activity in the Philippines and how governments and how private sector can actually come together to really fulfill cross-sectoral collaboration in this space. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to open the floor for discussion and questions and comments, and I would like to suggest a little different way. You probably have, in this kind of setting, we are usually we focus on the questions. We avoid questions, something deeper in our heart, but we refrain from asking questions, and sometimes we want to just stay on the surface of the question. And I think it's very rare chance today. You have a patience, and you have spent time in coming to Korea, and this is a very rare chance. So I think this, in our region, this may be a very rare chance that we can share our innermost thinking and ways that we can tackle the challenges if we really see. Because the reason why I'm suggesting this way is this morning when I came to this the convention center, I was a little suspicious about the topic, because for the last 2 years, wherever I go, the word I encountered most frequently was shrinking civic space or shrinking democracy in global context, not just in one country. So I thought about, we are facing shrinking civic space in general, and under these circumstances, do we really have a space for go into subcategory of this most vulnerable group in our civil society? So, but I regain a little hope, because I see a different levels of our understanding, but still there is, we are making a progress even in this area. So I would like to propose a little different way of presenting or questions, rather than I suggest to avoid the superficial questions and go directly into the questions that you really have. So may I open the floor we have about 10 more than 10 minutes, so I think we can have sufficient time for exchanging our views. Yes, please. Please.
Closest to my heart is the youth, because I'm very old. So anyway, connected to the topic of my colleague in the Philippines, I think part of the involvement also of the youth should be on enterprise development. So what type of collaboration do you think is most effective between enterprise and the youth? So both of you can answer. Thank you.
Yes, maybe just to help our youth colleague. In the report that I was mentioning around reaching the farthest first in social enterprise mapping in the Philippines, we have found out that 2/3 of social enterprises established within the past 2 years are actually owned and managed by the youth. Yeah, it's very good. So in terms of entrepreneurial capacity, the youth are dependable in that sense. Also, 44% of all social enterprises that we have surveyed are actually managed and owned by women. So that's also another good point from. And I think this is not just happening in the Philippines. There are similar researches coming out from Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar, and I think we have the same. Almost the same results, basically. So I'd give the floor to the youth delegate.
Thanks for highlighting a good point, and I think the cooperation of youth and social enterprise can be made in 2 ways. First of all, probably social enterprise can ensure the professionalism of the youth's activities. mostly youth activities are unprofessional due to their lack of experience, so that some people from social enterprise with lots of experience can help them to ensure their professionalism. And at the same time, I believe that social enterprise can help youth, social enterprise or some companies can help youth to solve the problems of youth. For example, I believe that the most serious issues nowadays that youth are currently confronting is the urban living and urban work. For example, youth are not familiar with labor laws or signing a contract, so they are not able to get a good place to live, and sometimes there are some situations where companies take advantage of the youth. Therefore, in those kinds of situations, either a public or private enterprise can take part in and provide some consultations or educational courses or seminars that can help them become more familiar with labor laws or signing a contract. Thank you.
May I open the floor? Yes, please. We have two gentlemen and one ladies.
Thank you very much. So my question is to Mr. Gomer. I would like to know what kind of challenges that social enterprise are facing in your country, and how do you do to overcome?
Yes, please.
Would you want me to answer? Okay. The top three challenges would be number one, the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable in terms of disasters. We're visited by a lot of typhoons and earthquakes, and I think when you do social entrepreneurship, most especially if you're still a startup, it's very difficult for you to come back or bounce back after you're hit by a disaster or after your social enterprise has been flooded or something. That's number one. The second one is around capital. And these challenges that I'm mentioning is actually still part of our report. Yeah? So if you would want to look at that after. The second one is around capital. While there is a lot of interest around social enterprise and social entrepreneurship work in the Philippines and in ASEAN or in Asia, there is still difficulty in terms of mastering business plans, looking for the right investment, looking for the right angel or impact investor to scale up your business. And I think it's still okay. Because in terms of financials, in terms of capital, it's not just a social enterprise problem. It's the whole problem of entrepreneurship. Even if you're a traditional business, you would still be challenged with where do you get your next capital to scale your business, or where will you secure your next cash flow, right? And the third one is around skills and capacities of social entrepreneurs. While a lot of youth are coming into the space, we appreciate the comment from our youth delegate around capacities of the youth to really run and to really project sustainable businesses and impact businesses moving into the next year. Yeah, those are my top three.
We'll take two more questions and we'll move on to the please. And here.
Thank you. I firstly congratulate Ms. So-Yoon Park, our youngest panelist, for her excellent presentation. And my query is directed towards her. And you see, millennials are accused of being too much self-centric. They are not bothered by anything until and unless they are personally affected. But we see a sudden change in this perception. In 2019, we are seeing youth activism everywhere, globally, demanding climate action, demanding democracy, demanding road safety in Bangladesh. So how do you explain this emergence of youth activism and about its sustainability? Thank you.
Yes, we'll have one more question and then I'll give the floor to Ms. Park. After these two questions, we will have two more questions together, starting from.
Okay, I also my question is for the Miss for the youth one, because I know it's maybe in some countries. I would like to give a case like Indonesia. Now is our governments give a lot of chance, opportunity for the youth generation to participate on governments. Even some of the ministry is very young in terms of the age. So, but like the problem especially that quite happen is about like in terms of different perspective between the old and then also for the young generation. So sometimes, of course, it's the matters of values. Yeah, the different in values. So sometimes it creates also is a bit of trouble. So maybe. Can you give like maybe what actually do you want in making this maybe the we can minimize like the problem between the young and then also the old generation. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for highlighting a good point. For first question, I'd like to say that youth activism in global society is of course a good sign of sustainable development. However, I'd like to point out that it is not a worldwide, it cannot be a worldwide phenomenon, because in my country, Korea, most Korean students, and especially high school students, are focused on going to good university, and to be honest, some youth activism does not really help them to go to good university. And that's why I think that is the reason that hinders youth participation in social discussion. And that is the reason why I suggested suggested that we should give incentives to related stakeholders, youth-related organizations, to promote a more participation. So to sum up, I think youth activism is probably a good sign of sustainable development, but because that is not really true in our society, which is Korea, I think more incentives such as giving them certificates or awards that can help them to go to a good university or get a good job can be, those kinds of solutions can be tried to induce more participation from Korean youth. And for the second question, I understood that your question was, how can we promote a communication between young and old, is right? I think that is a very tough question. But the most important and fundamental thing is to have enough conversation and recognize that they both have different characteristics and strength. For example, let's think about a conflict between grandmother and granddaughter in a family. Most cases, conflicts are easily solved by talking frankly about their needs and respecting those needs. Likewise, in our society, I think we should admit that the young and old are different because they share different experiences, they share different ages, and sometimes they can have some conflicting issues and desires. Therefore, to solve these kinds of conflicts, I think enough respect and conversation should be made between young and old, even though it can be sometimes not productive and not effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would like to have, we have another short, it's a toolkit presentation. Yeah. So I would like to have two more questions, and then within 3 or 4 minutes time, I would like to close this session so that we can move on to the next one. I recognize the ladies here, and there was one more. Yeah, okay,
yes,
please.
Thank you. I wanted to congratulate all the panelists for their presentations, and I also wanted to go back to what you said about incentives. It's very important to recognize, motivate. So I would like to invite all of you, since you had such good practices, to possibly submit your good practices to the UN Public Service Awards. One of the 4 categories is actually on delivering inclusive and equitable services for all. And another category is on gender-sensitive public service delivery. another one on digital transformation, and then the fourth one is more on whole of government approaches. So this is the good news. The bad news is that the deadline is 27 November, which is next week. But since you already presented, you probably have a lot of information, and we will be sending you the link to the UNPSA. And then we celebrate the winners from around the world on 23rd June, which is UN Public Service Day. So I encourage all of you to participate.
Thank you very much. Can I ask 2 or 3 panelists, 1 minute each, if you have a final comments, please.
I did mention the precondition to the inclusion of persons with disabilities. One of that is accessibility. I also mentioned that governments, donors, stakeholders to have an accessibility or non-discrimination criteria in developments, including procurement processes. Why? Because we ask sometimes when we hold conversation with ADB, for example, to ask about the inclusion of persons with disabilities, we are asked, but we don't do disability-specific programs, and we say, we understand that, but you're funding the governments to build our road is meant for the whole population. We are part of that whole population. So if you make your procurement process inclusive and accessible or have a non-discrimination criteria, everybody is included. So just to leave that with all of us on the accessibility of your programs, projects, policies, and think of all persons with disabilities, those who are physical, those who are blind, deaf, psychosocial disability, intellectual disabilities, and those who are deaf and blind at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have to close this session. And would you like to join me in giving them a great round of applause? Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, or almost good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mi Kyung Park. I'm Governance and Public Administration Officer of the United Nations Project Office on Governance, DPIDG UNDESA. This presentation, as the final and last presentation of today, would like to introduce one of the training toolkits of UNDESA DPIDG's curriculum on governance for the SDGs. This one specifically focusing on the theme of government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups, which is aligned with the discussion theme of this plenary session 4. So my presentation is composed of these 5 elements. First, I will briefly explain about the background, and then I will introduce the objectives and thematic focus of the training toolkit. Then its draft outline that we're currently developing, and our next step of development. And finally, I'll explain some follow-up capacity development activities. The reason why we are introducing this training toolkit is because also tomorrow in the morning, we have 3 working groups where participants will be divided to review a little more in depth and provide your comments to make sure that the training toolkits that we're developing are designed and aligned the actual demands and needs of the countries. So this presentation will be very short. I'll try to be very brief to just provide an overview on what the training toolkit is about. So, once again, this training toolkit is an integral part of the UNDESA DPIDG's curriculum on governance for the SDGs. This toolkit, you can see the puzzle in the middle from the 3rd row. The SDGs vision for our shared future is to ensure that no one is left behind. Social inclusion in that perspective is an essential pillar for fulfilling the 2030 agenda. However, the vulnerable groups who are marginalized in the society are often not a part of the decision-making process. In that regard, the concept of government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups is of particular importance. The vulnerable groups have their own specific needs which require an innovative approach to address those vulnerabilities, which are multifaceted and with also a big variety. They also confront a number of barriers and to access to the public service and to be engaged in policy making. Therefore, government needs to innovate the way that they are providing public services to the vulnerable groups and engage them in decision-making process. So through these innovative processes, the vulnerable groups can become actually a part of the solution or a driver for the SDG implementation achievement, not just sources of problem. So recognizing the importance of this theme, our office has started working on this theme by researching on this policy brief on innovation in delivering public services to vulnerable groups in 2017. And more recently, we organized one workshop during the 2019 United Nations Public Service Forum on the same theme. And these are some of the major policy recommendations that were from the main discussions of the forum. And I would like to draw your kind attention to the last policy implication that emphasizes the need to enhance the capacities of government officials to better engage vulnerable groups and change their mindsets. The governments are not just serving or helping the vulnerable groups, but actually the vulnerable groups should become and act as agents for change by and for their own. So based on this background, the objective of this training toolkit that we're developing is to enhance the capacities of government officials, particularly the local level government officials who provide the services to the vulnerable groups at the most direct level to foster innovation for promoting social inclusion of vulnerable groups. And these are the 4 thematic focuses of the toolkit or thematic clusters. First is identifying and measuring the unique vulnerabilities of different vulnerable groups. Second one is understanding specific challenges and opportunities of social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Third is promoting social inclusion of vulnerable groups through governance innovation, including by leveraging ICT and digital government. Last is building capacities for implementing innovation and tracking and monitoring the impact of governance innovation. So based on these 4 thematic clusters, this is the draft outline for a 5-day training course, for 1-week training course that we're currently developing. And this is a draft syllabus that we would like to solicit your feedback to further improve and complete. And these are some specific modules that the training course is composed of. Here I would like to mention 12 major modules. The first 4, Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, and 4 are focusing on the vulnerabilities, identifying the vulnerabilities in different contexts. And the Module 5, 6, 7 are focusing on innovation, particularly leveraging digital government and ICT. Module 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are more focusing on the means of implementation and building capacities and in creating enabling ecosystem. The module will also include, as shown in Module 10, developing participants' own action plans on how to actually implement the governance innovation to promote social inclusion of vulnerable groups. And also Module 11 specifically also focuses on means of implementation such as financing, partnerships, and Module 12 focusing on measuring progress, which could also discuss the data which are already identified during our earlier part of this plenary session as major perhaps challenges as well as opportunities. So these are some modules. I will not go into the detail one by one because that will be done during the working group tomorrow. Yes, so what will be the next step then after receiving your comments tomorrow during the working group? We'll further improve improve the structure of the syllabus and toolkit the details after reflecting the comments and feedback received from the participants. And then we'll be circulating the updated draft toolkit to country participants, particularly to the schools of public administration, to better reflect their comments before we finalize. And after we complete the toolkit, we'll further develop it into online training toolkits so that it could be for wider access. And we'll also organize training workshops to implement the toolkit. So lastly, I would like to finish my presentation by briefly explaining what could be then the follow capacity development activities of the PIDG UNPOG also in relation to in linkage to the training toolkit. So there could be some capacity development activities such as study visits, training courses, workshops, expert group meetings, webinars, other online toolkits as well. So this is the end of my presentation, but I think during our plenary session for today, there are many good country cases, very interesting, innovative country cases, as well as ideas that are, I think, already that could be fully incorporated to update to make our toolkit better. We look forward to hear more. I don't think I'll have too much time here today to get the questions and answers, but tomorrow during the working group, I very much look forward to listening to your more specific feedbacks to make this toolkit that we're working on much better and in line to your specific demands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think it's exactly 6 o'clock, so we are right on time. And I really appreciate all the speakers today and also panelists and also the participants who are waiting. And I believe that this must be a long day for you. But if you overcome tonight, then you will have a very successful convention tomorrow. And I really appreciate all the hosts. But above all, I would like to recognize one person who is without him, I think this symposium would not be possible. I would like to welcome Mr. Jung Jae-gun, who is he's the now director of this this group, but he was a former deputy director of this Ministry of Interior. So I would like to welcome and congratulate on Mr. Could you give him a big round of applause? Okay, thank you so much and have a good night and good meal and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.